Hello everybody, it's Larry, and we have a little small video for you today, a little treasure trove of information. And what we're going to talk about today is forms. You may or may not know where to get the forms on Ancestry because there's really not a link at the top. If you click on trees, you got your trees, search, you have that, DNA. It's not there in the DNA. It's not really there on the help, and you don't really see it there on the extras. So where do you get to it? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So what you do in order to get to the charts and forms and the downloads, you actually have to type in ancestry.com/download/. Now, if you leave off the slash at the end, we'll erase it here and do that, you will get a page is no longer available. Now, this has to do with the way their server is set up. Typically, you set it up where it works for either, but evidently this is something that was much older and hasn't been updated. But right here it says charts and forms, and you have ancestral chart, research calendar, research extracts, correspondence records, family group sheets, and source summaries. And for those of you who would like to know what those look like, well, here we go. The ancestral chart is basically your pedigree chart, and it goes over to the far right, and you'll number your chart. And then when you get to the next level, you say continued on chart number. So for those of you who like to keep the paper paper version, Ancestry has it there. You just go to downloads, download the forms, print them off as you need them, and fill them out. The research calendar. Now, typically this was for when you would go someplace and you would look at the microfilm, microfiche, and look up the roles and stuff like that. But you can still use it if you're using the card catalog for those that like to really document what they've done to make sure that you don't do it again. I don't know that that's as useful today online, because they update those card catalogs. They'll be updated, they'll add more and more records, and the record you want may be in an update. So documenting that you've already looked at that might not be the best way to go, unless you document how many total records were in that film at the time you looked at it, and so you can compare it. Yes, it's been updated, but nothing that I want to see, or maybe only those records. However, if you're going someplace to look in person, I think this would be very useful, because obviously that the repository isn't going to grow, and so you can actually say, okay, I'll look through these time periods, and when I go back next week or whenever, I want to look through these other time periods. So it is useful if you're going to in person. It can be useful if you're using the card catalog, although not as useful because those card catalogs do get updated. Now, if they've updated the entire group and you're wanting to document how much of it you've accomplished, then of course, yes, you would. Now, research extract, this is where you would pull your information off of the film, your search objective and what you got, and the correspondence. I think this is one that we don't do this anymore, simply because we're used to our email and our inbox, and we go back and we search our inbox, and we're corresponding through Ancestry messaging system. And we may or may not look back there. Now, I would recommend putting their ID in here and what you were contacting them about, and then if they get a reply or not. But most importantly, the date that you corresponded with them and who it was to, because in the modern day of email, we're used to getting that response in 24 to 48 hours, and if we don't, we're getting pretty antsy about it, simply because that's the way the world of communication is today. But when you're going through the Ancestry messaging system, you may not get correspondence like that. And you may think that after 3 days, they're just not going to reply. And it could be just they didn't look at their emails over the weekend, or if they did, they didn't have the opportunity to log back into Ancestry because you forgot to put your email address in that correspondence. And they may not have access to the computer to get onto Ancestry for a week or two. So when you're going through the Ancestry messaging system, it's not an email, even though it goes to their email. And if you're not adding your email address, then yeah, you probably want to document the correspondence, just so that you don't go crazy wondering, hey, why did it take them so long? I would say the average for me, if it's an active user, it's a couple of days. If it's a moderately active user, it's a week or two. And if they're an inactive user, it can be as long as 2 or 3 months before I get a correspondence, if at all. So, tracking that is really good, because honestly, I've had some difficulties with the Ancestry messaging system searching for old correspondences between me and that person for it to come up, and documenting it right here offline, definitely would have accomplished what I needed on each one of those occasions. Now, the family group records, we talked about in one video how you can actually print that off from inside a family tree and print off the family group sheet if you have everything. Sometimes, date will approved and, the religion, other things like that, those don't come across in that family group sheet that you print from Ancestry. So if you're wanting to have a little more information, christened or baptized or whatever, and some more of that information, that would be handy doing your group sheets. So the family group sheets, are available on that page. And the source summary for family information for your sourcing. And here are the legend codes that you can use, land, will, deeds, obituary, military records, etc. So if you're wanting to document what all sources you have for a person, this is, I would call, moderately useful. And I think more of a checklist would be good with looking at, the legend. Have you looked for all these type of records, birth and death certificates, marriage records, burial, maybe looking at find a grave. Have you looked for a will? Have you looked for military records? Have you looked for land records, obituaries? And going through and using this as kind of a checklist of the sources, I think that in itself is kind of handy. So having that, for a person and saying, okay, I've sourced it these ways and I haven't found this or I haven't found that. But being that it's on paper and not documented, it's kind of a two-edged sword, because unless you are looking up information for a specific person, then you're really not going to use that information. So I can see both sides of that, but definitely when you're searching, one person, getting their information, this type of information, this up here, is definitely a checklist of the things that you want to be searching for every person on your tree as you're sourcing it. And then the other thing that it has on the page, if you see up at the top, it has charts and forms, has census forms. Now the census forms to me are extremely handy. I've used these quite a few times. By quite a few, like dozens, if not more. And you see it's got the 1790 to the 1940 census, every one of the censuses. It's got the forms, they're blank. And then it's got the veteran schedule, the 1850-1860 slave schedule. And for the UK, you got 1841 through 1911. And then it's got some for Canada. It looks like it's got, more than Britain, but it's really three, 1851s, 1906, 1901, French census, 1901, English census, and 1911. So there really isn't as many forms for, the Canadian one, although it looks like there's not more as far as what you're going to get. But on the census forms, I've used that quite a bit. So whether you're UK, Canada, or US, it comes in real handy. So what forms, do you really see? Well, if you look at an 1850 census, sometimes the information is kind of blurry. This information is up at the top. A lot of times the page is not quite as firm against it when they were scanning it or something. So this is harder to read sometimes, to tell what the columns said and meant. Now, if you've done it for a while and you're doing more and more in a certain year, it's, you figure out what it is. But in the older ones, like here's the 1830 census. The book, this is like the left side of the book here, and then the bottom part was the right side, okay? So bottom part right here, right side, this side would be on the left side. And in the middle, right in this area, it would be blurry because of the bend of the pages, and over in this side, it'd be blurry because of the bends in the pages. So when you were dealing with the older females or the younger slaves, then that information, crucial and vital information to be had, sometimes it was very difficult to read. And definitely, these ages and these columns, I cannot tell you when I was counting over, okay, it's 5 columns over or 7 columns over, and then I would wonder what it is up here. Well, having these open over on the other side where you can quickly look and say, okay, the 5th column, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, that's of 20 and under 30 for the males. And so by being able to look at that real quickly, has been very, very handy in many, many occasions. And a lot of times this may even be blurry, or it may not even be on the top of that page, because a lot of the censuses in different areas, it was just these columns on subsequent page after page after page after page, and the headings were only on page 1. So you would have to, get the microfiche bar at the bottom, go back to page 1, and you'd have to remember what page your document was on, go and look and find the column, go back and forth between the columns. So going to the downloads and getting the census that you're working with or having some challenges with can be a extreme shortcut in finding the information as you're looking through, an 1810, 1820, 30, 40, and some places a 50 census. So there you go. That's what we have for today, and that is the download page. Again, you get to it by going to ancestry.com/download/. Don't forget the slash at the end, because if you do, you'll get that page not found. And remember, up at the top, you've got two parts here. You've got the charts and forms, which is this first part right here, and you've got the census forms, which is this part. Okay? All right. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Let me know down in the comments below if you've been using it or if this is something new to you. And as always, you guys have a great week.